Okay, hello everyone. Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon, depending on where you're joining from. A very warm welcome in today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. Let's get the webinar started. Really excited for this one because we're going to be talking about customer-centric framework for time to value in enterprise SaaS. Our panelists today will touch up on points like how to track value throughout the customer lifecycle, customer-centric framework for tracking value delivery, what really matters for value delivery, and a holistic and structured hierarchy for tracking value delivery. And to discuss on this topic, we have first of all Mausmi, who is the co-founder and COO of ZapScale. Mausmi is a two-time founder who built, scaled, and sold her first startup, ThreatSol, a few years back, and is now building ZapScale with a mission to make customer success 10 times easier for B2B SaaS companies. She is a skilled professional in business planning, customer success, and operations. Our special guest for today is Rupesh Rao. I was lucky enough to meet him last year in Bangalore in one of our
Mm.
customer success events. And the thoughts he shared as a panelist, I resonated so much with those words. So I'm really happy to have Rupesh with us. Rupesh is the founder and CEO of CogniSaaS. Rupesh has 20 years of IT experience globally in leading multinational companies as well as fast-growing SaaS companies in multiple industry verticals. With CogniSaaS, Rupesh aims to empower cross-functional teams to collaborate and deliver customer-centric onboarding and implementation. Rupesh being here today, and I will allow both of you to speak. I know I'm speaking too much, but I would just like to cover a few things before you start the discussion so the audience knows how to participate in the session, basically. Please feel free to ask questions during the webinar from our panelists. Remember, it's not a speech. We are trying to have a conversation. You can type in your questions into the Q&A box in the Zoom control panel. If you have anything else to say, please type it in the chat box. If you would prefer speaking rather than asking questions by text, please raise your hand and I will allow you to speak and ask questions directly from Rupesh and Mosmi. One more tiny thing, this webinar is being recorded. So if you do miss any part of it, please feel free to watch it again. I will share the link with you and I will put the channel link in the chat box shortly. So now let's get the professionals onto this stage, Rupesh and Mosmi. Really excited for the discussion. Let's get it started.
Thanks, Shivam. Thank you very much. And we're very happy to have you here, Rupesh. And we have picked a topic which is very specific. So I'm assuming the audience is also from that specific area where they're struggling onboarding, enterprise SaaS, time to value, challenges that comes with it. Of course, it's a very, let's say, very specific domain. It's very easy to say SaaS, but different SaaS and the way they are structured are extremely different. And honestly, I'm very excited about this topic because I am trying to figure time to value in my own business. So I hope to learn a lot in this session, Rupesh. And I love the way you've put all of this together. And I hope we can dig into your brain and get a lot more than what you have put on the slides. So welcome. And before we start, I want to know a little bit about how did you land up in CogniSaaS? I mean, doing onboarding in enterprise SaaS. What is it that excites you? How did you land up in that area?
Great. First of all, thank you, Mausmi, Shivam, and ZapScale team for having me here. So super excited to be here and share my learnings and experiences. Um, so yeah, to answer your question, how did I land in CogniSaaS? So before starting CogniSaaS, I was doing a whole bunch of roles in enterprise software world. Started as an engineer in early part of my career. Then I've moved to more client-facing roles. I've done the GTM roles, account management, customer success, and delivery. And in my last proper job, heading customer success and delivery in an enterprise SaaS company back in 2018, 2019, I faced these challenges myself, where we had 100 plus projects serving enterprise clients in multiple countries. Sales team sold something, chucked it over the fence. There are multiple features and modules and use cases to be delivered, and customer escalations and expectation mismatch was quite real challenge, right? And I was trying to figure out myself, okay, how do I solve this in a more scalable way, in a more structured way, and looked at all the project management tools in the market back at that time, and even customer success tools, and didn't really find anything which was coming close to the way I had started to paint the solution in my head, and spoke to a lot of delivery leaders back then, and it was very clear that it's a very common challenge. It was not just me alone, and it was clear that somebody has to fix this. So that's how CogniSaaS got started. So yeah,
Yeah.
we are on this mission to help fix this onboarding problem for B2B SaaS companies, because you see the customer life cycle. So sales piece, the sales stage is very well sorted. We have got the CRM tools right from 90s, and so it's very mature space. Then the post go live part of the customer journey is already sort of also fairly mature. We have got multiple CS tools, of course. ZapScale is one of them, and we have got Gain Sites and other tools in the space. But back in 2019, I did not find any tool which was made for B2B SaaS companies, helping streamline these onboarding challenges, because as we know, onboarding is the first step to write your destiny in customer success. If onboarding goes well, customer success will go well. If onboarding goes wrong, then everything else doesn't really matter. So that's how it got started. We wanted to be the tool which is made for B2B SaaS companies, help them get the onboarding right, which is the leading indicator of customer success. And so that's what we have been doing.
Best products are always built with personal pains, Rupesh. So I understand where you're coming from. So coming back to the topic that we have decided, okay, time to value in enterprise SaaS. Now we had a lot of discussion, previously before this webinar, and I found that very interesting. And you very nicely elaborated how time to value is extremely different, specifically when it comes to enterprise SaaS. I mean, we hear about time to value with B2C, first order, this, that, something just happened and there is value, right? But that is not the case with enterprise SaaS, because you're dealing with users and economic buyers. There are multiple levels and multiple people. So could you just elaborate to our audience, when you talk about time to value in enterprise SaaS, how is it different, which sets the context of our discussion?
Sure. So yeah, I think everybody talks about time to value these days, and again, especially in the current market situation where it's challenging phase for the customer success function itself. It's very important to get this piece right. So like I mentioned, getting value for the customer soonest possible is super critical. So look, in B2B SaaS, you have two kinds of products, right? One is more PLG led, uh,
Mm,
works great with SMB customers. We all have used Zoom, we all have used Slack. So these are all great examples. You go sign up and you start seeing value instantly. But when it comes to enterprise products, which are more towards your business process, automation, your HR tech, your supply chain, e-commerce, and a whole bunch of them, it's not quite like that, right? You have to manage customer expectations and business requirements, and there's a business requirement document, solution document, and multiple stakeholders to be managed, and they don't come to your tool. You have to, bring them to the tool and do the training and all of that. Integrations are involved, customization, configuration, a whole bunch of
absolutely.
variables are involved. So that is where your users don't get the value like how they would have gotten value
Yes.
from a Slack, right? And that is where this whole implementation cycle, as we all have heard horror stories with tools like we all know the names. It just goes on, right, for months and months and months, sometimes
Yes.
more than 1 year, right? And that is where the challenge lies, right? I mean, when the renewal time comes, customer usually asks that, hey, you have been implementing this for the last 12 months, we barely used it. And so it really creates a churn risk during renewal and a lot of challenges. So how do we kind of, optimize that time to value from contract sign to the go live? So that's the whole piece where uh, we have been focusing, from our side, helping our customers. So that's the whole idea of this conversation.
Of course, of course. And in enterprise, as we know, time to value, when anybody is buying a solution, of course, everybody is very excited. New tool, new tool, new tool. We'll have amazing results. but that excitement dies down after a while, and the longer the time to value, the lower the excitement, and you have to like get that energy back again to have that excitement of the tool. So to keep that energy up, it requires certain level, and at times it's not the software provider's fault, but at times there are various things that happen at the customer's end as well, right? That sort of, however fast you may want to go, but that is also dependent on how fast the customer has the bandwidth to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times, again, like I said, a lot of moving parts, right? Sometimes you have stakeholder changes,
Correct.
requirements keep on evolving. What the sales team would have set some expectations, there is an expectation mismatch. So a lot of complexities and a lot of challenges there. So hence, it really requires a framework to deal with this, moving nuances and so on. So that's where we found this quite helpful.
I am looking forward to discussing that framework. And ladies and gentlemen, Rupesh is going to share his playbook, his framework, and examples. So I'm really eagerly waiting to go deeper in that. So let's go to the next slide. Is that okay? Next slide.
Sure, go
Yes.
ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So the most talked about word in the market, value, right? Everybody talks about it should achieve value, and value is very important. How do you define value and how do you track it? And that becomes extremely important, of course, the entire life cycle. And this is something that we've talked about. So before we go to time to value, it's important to understand when we start talking about value, what do we mean by it? Shall I
Yeah,
go to the next slide, Rupesh?
sure. Yeah, you can.
Okay, all right.
So this whole value concept, we all know what value means, but I think sometimes value can mean different things to different people. So
True.
that is also a challenge. It's very much perception driven. What value means to the customer may not mean the same thing for us as the solution provider. So I think it starts right even from outside the slide here we have got from the left of the slide where value education, which typically happens in the marketing phase, right? So during
Absolutely.
marketing, you are educating your audience and customers and prospects that what is it that you do, what is it that you solve for. So you're educating, then they lean forward, they are having a conversation with you, then your sales team comes and promises certain value outcomes for the customer, and that's they come on board, hoping for that value to happen. And then during onboarding and delivery, you deliver that value, right? And once the customer has taken your product, they have onboarded the users, implementation is completed, then they hope to realize that value by actually using the product, right? So that's the adoption phase. So that's what we mean, the different stages of value. And I think it's important to sort of again need for this framework, what is value? So having a common definition of value that you can mutually agree with the customer in advance helps quite a lot to make sure to prevent expectation mismatch, right? Customer after the go live, it's quite typical that customer will say, "Hey, your sales team had said XYZ, and this is not what we got," and escalations and all that drama happens. So, I think having a framework around value and value delivery, the central piece here that we are going to focus more about, is super important and helps you to set the expectations with the customer and make sure it's a successful delivery and you get it right the first time, right?
True, true. And we don't end up fighting with the sales team always. If they
Yeah,
promise something and then you are struggling to keep that promise in, delivering that value. So that definition and that defining and that promise that is there. So we always say under promise and over deliver. But somehow it sort of
usually it's the
it
reverse.
takes a lot of control for sales to say, okay, hold on, hold your horses, don't overpromise, don't say so many things. And therefore, that definition becomes so much more important when the
Yeah,
promise is involved because you're signing a document, you're agreeing on something. So we always say the onboarding and CS team needs to get involved at the time when the sales is signing agreement, the success plan needs to be signed at that stage as to what is going to be delivered. And all parties, like the implementation team, the success team, the sales team needs to be involved at least so they're all on same page, because at times it also happens that sales
yeah,
may have said something else, but later on the customer asks and the interpretation may be different, right? So
yeah.
that also happens at times. I mean, I am trying to set those things in my business, and that's the reason I'm asking these questions.
Oh, it's super important. I think it's always best practice to involve CS teams, implementation teams, even before the deal is closed. Maybe once they reach certain stage, band qualified or 70% probability. I think it's a great practice to bring them into the picture to really be on the same page. And sometimes even the product team, it's good to bring them on the same page as well, so that in case any new feature requests have been promised, which are to be prioritized in your roadmap, so there's no sort of later on blame game that I was not aware and all the information disconnect between multiple teams. But yeah, having that common framework and understanding of what is it that we are promising and what is it that we are going to deliver, there should be a common thread around it internally and externally. Yeah.
Don't worry, people. Rupesh will take us through a nice checklist to do all of those. It's just the precursor of where we are going. So that's the framework I am extremely excited about, Rupesh. I think it's brilliant the way you have put all of this together and how it sort of, gives a very controlled way of looking at things and being able to structure them. So I really want you to elaborate on this. I know I have heard a little bit, but I really want to go deeper in this framework.
Yeah. So I'll spend a moment here. See,
Sure.
historically, what happens is we would have promised something to the customer and chucked it over the fence from sales to delivery team. And delivery team typically will have two, ways of looking at it. One is they will have a bunch of tasks to be done, which they are tracking in some Excel sheets or some project management task tracking tools, and they will have a bunch of things to be done on the product side, tracking any feature request promises or configuration customization. So the whole delivery piece historically has been thought in the boxes of doing a bunch of tasks and doing a bunch of product things, so to speak, right? But somehow in this thing, the core thing gets lost. That what is it that we started with, right? So what are the outcomes? Because customer is only interested in in their outcomes that they are looking forward to. They don't really care about the bunch of tasks you are doing in your project management tool or closing your Jira tickets from your product. That those are means to an end, but that is not the end goal. So the whole idea was to how do we build a framework which actually helps you measure what the customer cares about and also your own company, because at the end of the day, your business is interested in taking the customer to live, driving the
Correct.
revenue and all of that. So how do we tie these pieces of the puzzle, delivering outcomes for the customer that we were promised and revenue for your own organization, and also bringing the concept of prioritization in a meaningful manner, right? So that's what is the framework about. I think we can go to the next slide.
All right. Oh, let's go to the next slide. Yes, there it is.
So So the way we look at this one is, so this was exactly my challenge when I was other side of the fence, trying to figure out, okay, we have got 100 projects running at any point of time. And these were the three things that I think every delivery leader, every CS leader, directly or indirectly, uh, gets measured on, right? So this is what they are trying to make sure is in right shape and form. So I'll go one by one on three pieces of this equation here. So first is obviously the current status of all the implementations, all the modules or use cases that we are implementing for the customer. Is it red, amber, green? Is it on track? Is it gone live? And who is accountable? Is it internal team? Is it external team? So that's one piece that you should be tracking about, and ideally keeping the customer also on the same page. They should be having the same level of visibility that we have got these five things to implement, because a lot of times the delays happens from customer side, right? They haven't given you the data you need, they haven't given you the sign off you need and all of that. So how do you keep you and the customer on the same page on the status of overall project and things? The second is, this is not talked about much but very very important, is the impact of any go live delays on your own revenue, right? So for many, many companies, the annual recurring revenue, which is the
Mhm.
annual license, doesn't really start off until you go live. And it's a common sort of commercial model. In some cases, obviously, companies will have revenue start right from the contract sign off, but it's more of a, I would say, rare case. But for majority of companies, so any delay you have, let's say you have $1 million ARR customer, right? And
Oh,
the go live got delayed by a month. Right now, just simple pro rata logic, right? $1 million customer, go live got delayed by a month. Effectively, you lost 100K, right? Now, this 100K is not a small amount depending on the customer. Now, your CFO, I'm sure, cares about this. And they want to track this, right? Because they might have forecasted this in their quarterly forecast to the board and whatnot. And the questions will keep on coming. Okay, we said this will go live last quarter, hasn't gone live, and when is it going live? Because there's a revenue impact. So how do we track this? Right now, it's there is historically there is no tool for it, and if you have got depending on the volume of projects and different uh, customers you're trying to implement, you have to also figure out that okay, what is the total revenue risk we are exposed to? Because you may have 100 customers. Out of these 100 customers, let's say 30 are on track green, 30 are, let's say, red status. Then what's the total summation of these 30 customers running behind, right? And not only that, how do you prioritize? Because, and that's the next piece. So we all have limited resources, limited bandwidth, and we have to always do more with less. So if you have got a whole bunch of customers in the red status, you obviously can't satisfy all of them. Then how do you prioritize to make sure you really move the needle? So, and majority of cases, 20% of customers will contribute 80% of
Of
your revenue,
course.
right? So how do you figure out that those, figuring out needle in the haystack, okay, who are those 3 customers from this 30 who we should prioritize to mitigate our revenue risk? So I think that understanding is very important. That should be discussed among cross-functional teams between sales, CS, and product. And this is a common challenge we have seen. Product teams always, complain about that. They don't really get visibility of, okay, you have asked me all these feature requests. You haven't told me the context behind it. You haven't told
Mm.
me that if we don't release this feature, so what is
What
the
is
revenue?
happen?
Are we going to lose a customer? Is it going to create a churn risk or so much revenue we will lose out? So that visibility is not quite nicely captured. And this is where our tools also don't quite help us, the legacy tools we have been using for product and task tracking. So typically gets tracked in some sort of Excel sheet between these teams and obviously challenging with that. But having this framework of these 3 things, current status of projects and of outcomes, and then tying it to the revenue risk, and then tying the prioritization based on these 2 things can really help you become customer centric because customer and you are on the same page. You can drive your internal prioritization in a much more meaningful way with your product team and engineering team, and then make sure all the stakeholders are also aligned in this process. Right? So that's the sort of the framework that has worked well for us.
Well, very, very interesting, Rupesh. I do want to, dig a little deeper on certain areas, especially revenue risk when you talk about. As a founder, what I think is it's not just that $100,000 this month. I also have my months counted for next round raise, right?
Yeah,
And for that next round raise, I have a target of revenue because when I reach
absolutely.
X revenue, only then I can go and pitch it to next round investor. Now,
Yeah,
this sort of messes up my timeline,
yeah,
right? And which I know it's very difficult to calculate in number terms about this. Of course, this is very indirect, but it's a huge risk that me and you as founders we carry if we are
absolutely.
delayed in implementation, right? And I think this is sometimes not looked through from that lens at all, that why this becomes, it's not just $100,000 or whatever the number is in this quarter, but oh my god, this is going to mess up my life in like 10 months or 6 months down the line, where I am supposed to reach a certain target and start talking to my investors and they are tracking me, right? I'm sure
Yeah,
your potential investors are also tracking you. You are sending
absolutely.
them weekly, monthly reports that these are my numbers, you want that graph to go up. And if it goes
Yeah,
slowly, there are lots of questions and it's very difficult to explain that customer did not send us that data and therefore it is next month it is happening. It's very difficult to have that conversation and explanation.
absolutely. And investors also, it's a metric now. So they talk about your contracted ARR and what is the live ARR.
Correct.
And this is a very common question from even VCs that, hey, your contracted ARR might be $10 million. You have closed $10 million of revenue. Great job by you and your sales team. They also ask, okay, how much is your live ARR? How much
Why is
of
your billing
revenue
low?
have you taken live?
Correct.
So if you have got 10 million of booked ARR, but your live ARR is not close to 10, then it raises a whole bunch of questions.
Of course, of course.
And as you rightly said, this becomes a critical metric for even VCs to judge you that, okay, is this a business which is fundable from their point of view? So, yeah, it's a very critical metric, especially in current times.
Absolutely. In current times, it's an extremely important. Okay, Shivam has raised a hand. So I'll let him speak. I have more questions in prioritization though. Yes, Shivam, please go ahead.
Okay, I am back. We have a couple of questions. One of them I can answer. Will we be able to get access to this presentation? Yes, for sure. You will have an access to this presentation and the recording of the webinar once it ends. Next question is along the lines on which you were discussing. Can you elaborate a little bit on what are the revenue risks on a delayed time to value?
Okay, sure. So, see, revenue for majority of, again, enterprise SaaS companies will have two parts to it, right? One is your product license, annual license that you collect for your product, and other is typically a one-time implementation fee. And this is again common in more enterprise segment where you charge one-time fee for configuration, professional services, doing integrations, all of that. And in many cases, this one-time fee has also been tied to the project deliverable and you hitting certain
Correct.
milestones. So it's very common we see that, and sometimes these one-time fee also could be quite a large number, and it can be sometimes in crores of Indian rupees, right? And hundreds and thousands of dollars from a US market perspective. So this will be tied to, let's say, they will typically take 10 to 15% on contract sign off, then under 20% on solution sign off, then remaining in the UAT go live under milestone, and then rest on the go live, right? So now, as you can see, even if your BRD sign off or UAT sign off got delayed, you have a whole good chunk of money to lose or got delayed. And this is again, your CFO will be on your back. And on top of that, your license also gets pushed out, right? So it's a double impact. Your one-time fee and your recurring revenue both get pushed out. So it's super critical that we do everything to make sure, because this is what ultimately you will get judged on, right? And especially again in this current market, revenue is the king. Everybody's talking about
Oh,
revenue
yeah.
and profitability and whatnot. So as a CS team, as an implementation team, as an onboarding team, it is super critical for you to make sure you are moving the needle on the revenue, making sure your CFO is happy. And in this market, CFO is the king. And so, yeah, this framework really helps you to start measuring this first of all, because as they say, what doesn't get measured doesn't get delivered.
It doesn't get controlled,
So,
of course.
yeah. So first thing is to start measuring it. That okay, we had this. This was our project plan. And these were the revenue tied to each of these milestones, and this was our go live date, and this was our annual license revenue. And then if we are pushing things out, if there is any delay, sometimes you don't control it, but at least you want to be able to see it so you can do something about it. You can take this information to your product team, engineering team, leadership team to ask for their help, saying, hey, we are losing this much revenue. Can we do XYZ, right? So it brings, and everybody in the company usually is not anti-revenue. Everybody wants to help make sure we get revenue because it's in everybody's interest. But having that meaningful data in a meaningful format around the table to have that conversation is super important, right? So this is where kind of it helps.
Yeah,
Shivam,
it's
hope I answered the question.
Yes, yes. I hope that answered the question. You may continue the presentation now.
it also, changes the conversation when you go to product team and say, hey, if you don't bring this feature, we are
Exactly.
going to lose so much of revenue, which is at risk because of
Yeah.
this. And that number that gets attached to it really changes the whole story of that conversation, right? Which
Yeah.
is where we come to the prioritization plan. So prioritization plan, yes, in terms of picking, of course, it seems, very simple that, okay, so revenue risk, I will pick high value customers. But you know what? At times when you're picking high value customers, the effort to get them to, cross that line may be very
Yes.
different, right? So there are
Yeah.
multiple parameters for that prioritization decision. It's not that simple, right?
Yeah. So exactly, and a lot of times it happens that you have closed a whale customer, and that whale customer completely dominates your product roadmap and just completely disrupts it in some cases, right? So what is the opportunity cost of that, right? You may have 20 other customers who might be smaller ticket relatively, but making sure you don't disrupt them. And you as a SaaS company, you want a repeatable motion, a repeatable product, and a feature that you build should be sellable to 20 other customers, not just one customer, right? So
Absolutely.
having that sort of visibility of this mapping, so to speak, right? Let's say you have got 50 customers who have asked for 70 feature requests.
Mm.
So essentially, it's a many-to-many mapping. You have to track, okay, which feature was asked by which customers and which customer asked how many feature requests. So this many-to-many mapping needs to be tracked. Now, unfortunately, again, the tools we have had at our disposal historically, they don't do a good job in this. Our CRMs, our Jiras, and legacy project management tools, they don't have this architecture or infrastructure to even track this, right? So again, this is where teams struggle with some Excel sheets. So, but tracking this many-to-many mapping and then bringing some intelligence to it, that okay, we have got this feature asked by three customers, total revenue impact from these three customers is X. We have another feature asked by Y number of customers, the revenue impact is something else. There is a clear sort of, a math in front of us, and we can bring some science to this method, to this
Of
madness,
course.
where it can get sometimes very emotional. Somebody will say in the room that, hey, this customer has been shouting, and that customer might be a very low revenue customer, and just because they have been
It's
shouting and we prioritize them just to, but that's not the right way, and scalable way.
the one who makes the most noise gets the priority.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
it requires a lot of effort to not get swayed by that noise. That's one.
Yeah.
And second, not get swayed by the whale. And it's a
Yeah.
huge risk for a business as well, because now you're putting all your eggs in one basket with just one customer. Yes, of course,
Right.
they might bring big moolah, but it's a huge risk for a business to,
Yeah.
forget about others and just focus on one, and then get lost in that. Your product roadmap gets messed up. Like it's a very big risk
Yeah.
to have a whale customer and then forget about others.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's a very common challenge as well.
I know it's sometimes you have to do things which you may not want to being a
Yeah.
startup,
Yeah.
because well, you gotta survive. But okay, that's a different discussion altogether.
But
So
hopefully, this framework gives our audience something to take away from this conversation, that, okay, how do we bring some science and method to the chaotic way these things can go up?
yes, this framework is very helpful. And now I want to know, Rupesh, how do we get going on the framework? How do I really like practically implement it in my own environment, and of course in our audience's specific business environment?
Sure.
Okay,
So
let's
let's
open
go
the
to the
magic
next.
bag. Let's
Yeah.
open the magic bag.
So we have got a checklist for the audience to take advantage of. So let's go through the checklist. Um, so essentially, it's a simple framework, right? So you want to track the who, the what, and the how. So you want to track, okay, who is the customer, what is their business requirement, their context, and that is the first piece. The second is, okay, what is it that we have sold to them, the value promise, right? We talked about earlier. You would have promised certain use cases, certain outcomes, or if you're a product company with certain modules in your product, then customer would have paid for certain modules to be implemented, right? Very, very common in enterprise space. So that is what you have to have a very clear sort of tracking of that. And then how do we deliver these, whatever we promised as part of the value? Now, this how bit will typically have two parts to it, right? Now, one is your product dependencies. You are going to your product management team for feature request prioritization, enhancement request, all of that. You are going to your engineering team for any specific customization, configuration, bug fixes, all of that. So tracking all of this is one piece. And as part of this, you also need to talk about or track the business context of the customer, the business case, because product team will ask you first thing that, hey, you asked for these feature requests. We already have got our own backlog of roadmap. Why should I prioritize this feature request? Right. So then you have to make a business case to the product team. So there you need to bring together the information around, okay, we have these five customers, this is their use case, this is the go live date, this is the revenue impact, because otherwise they don't know how to prioritize, right? Because let's say for a feature, you have got three customers, right, who asked for it, and one customer go live date is, let's say, next month in May, another customer go live date is in June, and another customer go live date is in July, right? Now, if you don't track this information, if you don't give this information to the
Mm.
product team, they might very well, because of their own challenges and bandwidth and constraints, they might choose to release this feature in July, right?
Yes, yes,
If this
absolutely.
feature comes in July, then guess what? Out of the three, two customers are already at risk because
You
they
missed,
wanted
you
it in June.
missed.
You missed, right? So this is a big challenge, right? And so tracking this context of the customer, the revenue impact, and sharing this with the product team in a meaningful manner is super critical. And so that is one piece. The second is your usual task tracking. And this task tracking you have to do internally, externally with the customer, and making sure everybody's on the same page. Super, super important, right? Now, so again, typically what happens is these two tracks pretty much run very independently without any linkage between them, right? So, for
Correct.
example, I'll give you a simple example, right? Let's say there is a product feature that has been asked by a customer, and feature is not released yet; it's in your roadmap still, and you have a task in your project plan called UAT, right?
Mm.
Now, obviously, common sense, we know that UAT cannot happen until the feature is released. Now, if you go and look at your tools that you are using, this intelligence is not there in these tools. Your project management tool doesn't know anything about your product feature in your Jira. Your Jira doesn't know anything about your UAT task in your task tracking tool, and that is where the disconnect happens. Now, if the feature gets delayed, somebody should manually go and say that, okay, now my UAT is also delayed, right? Because there is no feature yet.
And manage customer expectation accordingly, like, that this is delayed and this is how it's going to happen in
Yeah,
advance. So we are dependent on the memory or the capability or Excel capability of poor onboarding professionals or CS
exactly.
professionals handling that.
So this is again a very classic structural challenge that we have seen, and so tying these product dependencies and task dependencies into, and they are tightly coupled, and but
Of course.
unfortunately the tools don't. So linking them together in an intelligent manner, and then extracting from that. So what does it mean for the state of my every module, every use case? Is it red? Is it amber? Is it green? Is what is required, right? So that's how the checklist. Hopefully, this will help the audience to track who, what, and how, and then they can do something about
Yeah, I am looking
Um,
forward to exactly the example that you're going to share, because I know you have
it. Sure.
you have put it in such a simple way, and it feels like, that we can I can really like just take it and like copy paste into my process the way
Sure.
you have put together. So I want to go ahead from here on so that we do understand the business context, the use case, the rack status, and of course, product and task, and the way you put together how product and task are interdependent. And that is something which is extremely important to understand with that example. So let's go ahead and see how it
Mausmi,
works together.
sorry
Yes,
to
Shivam?
interrupt. One of our attendees, Simrita, has raised her hand, so I will allow her to speak and ask
Sure,
her question.
absolutely.
Simrita, you may ask your question now.
Hey,
Hi,
Simrata.
hi, am I audible?
Yes, you
Yes.
are.
Perfect. I'm sorry, I my question was for a little bit behind in the presentation, so
It's
I'm sorry
okay.
to take you a couple of slides back. But my question actually is that when you spoke about a whale client asking for like multiple different features, and then you have smaller clients asking for features. When you're an enterprise, especially a cloud sort of product, how do you manage, staying true to being a cloud product, which means that your features should extend across the product sort of range, and then actually going ahead and maybe customizing it to a certain degree for your large clients because, I mean, they give the value that they do. How do you sort of stay true to your DNA from that perspective? Do you have separate teams working on different from a DevOps and even from a product engineering standpoint? Just some thoughts on that. If someone could help me with that.
Okay, so I'll answer that, and Mosme, you can add your
Yes,
thoughts.
of course.
So thanks. It's a great question, Smrita. So the way I think we have seen work well is, I think every product roadmap decision should be looked at from different dimensions, right? One is your own product vision. Obviously, you are a product company. You have certain vision that you want to build the product in a certain way. So that is one dimension. Second is your sort of existing customers, right? What existing customers are asking, does it make sense in your product? And You want to make sure your existing customers, you are going deeper and deeper in solving their daily pain points. So that is another good dimension to look at. Third is sometimes also good to look at your competition, right? Sometimes you can learn from competition, take inspiration from them, and then build on your own features to drive more competitive advantages. And fourth one is also your new prospects, right? Your sales team. So your new prospects sometimes can ask all kinds of crazy things, but sometimes they do ask some very interesting feature requests which make a lot of sense for your product roadmap, right? So if you heard the same thing, and this is where having a feedback loop with sales team is super important, right? If your sales team is telling you that, hey, we heard this feature request 10 times in the last 1 month, then that's a pattern to catch on to, right? And then bring that into your product roadmap, brainstorm thinking. And so these four dimensions, if you look at, and more importantly, then you have to think about the repeatability, because at the end of the day, you are a SaaS business, everything should be repeatable. So if you can think of this feature that we are building makes sense for our existing customers, it will make their life easier and drive better adoption, and it helps us to win new business from new prospects, and it helps us to drive more competitive advantage over our competition. So those are the kind of levers we should look at to prioritize things, so that way you don't get swayed by any single customer. Right? Those are my thoughts. Mausmi, you can add.
Yeah, I think it's a very pertinent question, and we all grapple with it, right? In fact, we had a build discussion today earlier in our office, and when we are discussing this, it's a necessary evil. You have a big customer who's paying a large amount of money, so and they are pushing your product in a certain direction, and they want customization. Let's say that firstly, I like what I do is what I can tell you. What I do is I do not we try not to agree to any customization, but we try to put it as part of our product offering first. Second, for whale customers or really large customers, if they are asking for certain things, of course, using all the other prioritizations that Rupesh said, decision making has to be based on multiple other things, and then have that conversation with the customer that, okay, these are important and these are not. These are all very, let's say, not very structured conversations at times, but these are very relationship conversation where you are able to find that middle ground. However, sometimes, because we're all growing startups, I don't know how big your company is, but as you grow, of course, when you become very large, you have stronger ways of negotiating things. But at growth stage, when you are there, sometimes you will have to take decisions which may not be scalable, right? Which may not be completely aligned with your product. And I am always scared, frankly, to have one of those whale customers, because I know they can end up pushing you completely in a direction which can completely derail your entire business. So having that balance is important. Sometimes you compromise and give in to certain things because you also need the money, right? And you are in need of money because you're growing, you got to stay alive. But at times you need to be very careful that this could be the death of you if you leave everything else and just focus on one. So having that balance, and it's a very contextual thing, that a decision that you will have to make. I'm sure both of us in our own businesses have had to make these decisions during our journey, and at times we may have to say no to certain customers because their requirement is completely different in terms of product alignment, which is okay, which is not bad. So staying true to your product roadmap as a founder, as a company, as a startup employee, you are thinking in that direction, this is not what my product should be. Of course, adjusting to customer requirements and selecting it is very, very important. But again, it's contextual is all I can say. I don't know if I've answered your question or we have been able to address your question, Simrita. Oh, is she already mute, Shiva?
Yeah, she said, yeah, it looks like you answered the question.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, all right, Rupesh. So shall we go ahead? Thanks, Simrita, for the question. We'll go ahead from checklist to the understanding of how this structure works together, especially for enterprise SaaS.
Okay, so moving on. So we talked about the framework for customer-centric value delivery. We talked about the checklist, and so now from that checklist, you have gotten into the motion. The project is running, and now what you should do? Now what you should measure, right? So now uh, you should be having tracking of the red, amber, green, signals at these four levels. And the reason for that is these are all connected in a meaningful way, right? If you think about the logical structure, you have got the client who close a deal with you, and that client is working on certain projects with you. Sometimes you will have multiple projects with the same client, right? First project in one business unit or one geography. If it's a large international enterprise client, then you may have multiple projects running in multiple geographies running with them at the same time. So you have multiple projects that you need to track, right? And in every project, you are implementing certain, scope. You're implementing certain modules and use cases or whatnot, right? So again, tracking module wise, red, amber, green is super important. And lastly, your day-to-day stuff for delivering the project or a module, you need to close a bunch of tasks in your project plan, right? So task, I'm sure everybody is familiar. They all do this in the project management tool. But what gets ignored and not very commonly done is the other three pieces, right? Tracking the everybody knows the RAG of a task. This is what project management tools have been doing historically. But I think tracking the red, amber, green at other three levels, right? At every module level, every project level, and also at every client level is super important. So if we go to the next slide, I think I can
Sure.
explain this with a more
Absolutely.
real life example of how we should think about the hierarchy of this tracking, right? So as I mentioned, it's think of it like a more logical tree diagram, right? So you have got the client at the top, and who you are working on multiple projects with this client, and that's where you have got your project level tasks, your kickoff meeting, all the progress tracking of the project and the program level governance and whatnot. And then under the project, you have got multiple use cases or multiple modules you're implementing. And for every module or use case, you also have a standard playbook that if somebody has come to me for, let's say, a certain module, then I know what steps 1, 2, 3, 4 need to be done for that module. And you can create templates for each specific module as well. So bringing them in a more logical manner like this, and then having a rack tracking at all these levels is what really helps you track value delivery. So this is what you promise to the customer to begin with, right? Is what this is all about. If we go to the next slide, then we also have a real life example of a HR tech company. So let's say you are a HRMS end-to-end product provider, and you have got Amazon as your client. And Amazon obviously is a large enterprise client. You with them, you will be having multiple projects, one in the US, one in the UK, and these geographies will have their own scope and their own timelines, and sometimes their own revenue themselves, right? So how do you track? Let's say in the US, you are doing recruitment module implementation for them and employee onboarding module implementation, whereas in the UK, they may have different scope. They have asked you to implement payroll module and attendance module, right? Now, for each of these modules, you already have a standard playbook that there's a configuration to be done, there's an integration to be done, there's a testing to be done. So you can create templates and then track them based on that. Now, every module will have its own sort of lifespan. It will have a start date, it will have an end date. Sometimes these modules will go in parallel, sometimes there will be a phased rollout of modules, a lot of different permutation combinations, right? Now, these modules can get delayed on their own, right? So, for example, you can see here payroll module is running behind, it's in red status, whereas the attendance module is on track, it's green. So, how do you track this? And tracking this at this level is super important because this is what your customer is, waiting eagerly for. They are like, okay, when is my payroll module going live? I want to start doing my payroll on your tool, and I don't want to do my older tool or Excel sheet anymore. And that's what they are eagerly waiting. But if you cannot measure this, if you can't show to your customers the delivery status of every module, then this is not really helping them. If you're sharing a project plan with a whole bunch of tasks, less 20 tasks on your side and their side, and so the customer is going to wonder like, okay, so what? In tell me one line, when is my payroll
Mm-hmm.
module going live, right? So that crystal clear summary is very important. And based on that, you should be able to see the ripple effect that, hey, my payroll module is running behind, it's in red. So what does it mean for my UK project? So that obviously means that your UK project is also red, it's also behind, and sometimes you want to take that impact on your client because you, let's say, have a monthly review or
Mm-hmm.
a QBR with the customer tomorrow, and your CEO came to you saying, hey, I want to know everything about this customer. I have a client level review with them.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you give it to your CEO, right? So having this drill down architecture makes it very powerful for anybody to just go through and figure out, okay, this customer is red because of UK project being red, and that's red because the payroll module is red. And this also brings a lot of accountability, right?
Yes.
And within
Yes.
that, you can drill down further that, okay, why is payroll module red? Because either some feature in your
Mm-hmm.
Jira is not released or some task is not. So that interconnection intelligently, what we talked about earlier,
Mm-hmm.
becomes super important, right? So having this architecture, tracking this in this way, and also showing this to your customer, obviously you can control what they see, what they don't see, is very important.
Of
So now
course.
your even customers can say, because let's say your payroll got delayed because your customer hasn't even given you the employee database or a list of
Yeah.
employees. Now, how do you hold them accountable saying, hey, payroll module has not gone live because we don't even have the employees list from you? So very, very important. So sharing this visibility at module level
Mm.
internally and also with customers is super important. Again, for the value delivery, measuring the value delivery. And this also brings a common language. Okay, what is it that we are
Mm.
trying to measure? So yeah, so this is how we think about the architecture to
It's
track the RAG at all the four levels.
I am thinking from a different direction, Rupesh, that yes, payroll module is delayed. Whoever's is the task delay. But the point is, other things I've done right. But what will happen is that will make the most noise. And when you go to a meeting
Yes.
with the client, they will only talk about payroll. And if you don't have the structure put together, they will not be able to see all the good things that have also happened.
Yes.
The conversation will go from payroll is not live, what is happening, you have not given Excel, and it becomes unnecessary, a not so nice discussion. Instead of having all the positive things, the 10,000 positive things that you have done to get everything else working. So if
Yeah.
you have this structure put together, it gives that visibility and understanding to bring your value as, as an onboarding person and what you have done as a client or as a vendor, and put that together to the customer. That would be, that would give you so much more leeway in terms of having that discussion amicably, that okay, all
Yeah.
of this is working, we are on it, these tasks are delayed, we are working on it, and like, could you please give a little bit of a push to your team, maybe, then the conversation changes in a very different way.
Absolutely. And it's the whole point of bringing the holistic picture for your internal team and also for your customers. That we had, let's say, 5 modules to implement.
Mm-hmm.
3 modules are done, they're on track,
Yes.
and everything is fine. One of the modules is amber because it's slightly delayed, and one of them is red because our talented sales team sold Earth, Moon, and Sun to the customer. We don't even have this feature in the product, and we don't even know whether we can even deliver this. Product team has already said we are not going to prioritize this feature. So that visibility internally and externally is super important. And how do you drive the conversations to get it either prioritized or reset customer expectation, saying that, hey, this feature is not going to be coming for another quarter, and because of XYZ reasons, and maybe you have a workaround so that you can give them a sort of a early value, time to value with some core features that you already have, and then agree this for a phase two rollout
Mm.
is super
For
healthy.
a long term time to value, of course.
Exactly, exactly.
Of course. And this, the way you have put this together, this also helps in the visibility of time to value, because there are various, like for attendance module, time to value is already there.
Yeah,
Right. So you can say that there are multiple time to values that will happen within this context. And you can start
yeah.
tracking those individual milestones that you have actually achieved in that journey.
Exactly. And sometimes, see, customers also want to collaborate with you, right? They also want to have that partnership
Always.
spirit that, hey, they
Mhm.
also understand that you can't get me
Mhm.
all 5 modules together on day one. So if you show this visibility to them and mutually agree on the rollout, module-based phased rollout, they're also collaborative. And if you keep them informed and be transparent with them, then they're also willing to be flexible in cases, right? So, but having this
True, true.
visibility is super important.
Yes, yes, to having that visibility and to be able to share it whenever the customer asks for it and not
Yeah.
go back in 10 days and start creating a massive Excel sheet with massive things, which makes it
Yes.
so very difficult to actually visualize what is happening. The
Yes.
complex project management dashboards with, multiple dependencies, and that this one task is like read in this corner. So it's very difficult to visualize that and put that together.
Yeah. And also you can hold the customer accountable saying, hey, look, this is the money you have already paid us, right? And if this module
Right.
doesn't go live because you have not given us data, it is sort of your opportunity cost. So they appreciate
Absolutely.
that visibility and accountability as well, and they actually move forward to close anything on their end if they have a visibility on some sort of a dashboard. Yeah.
Thanks, Rupesh. I think this is our last slide. Is that it? Yes.
I think so. Yeah. This is
Yes.
our last slide.
Yes. Thank you very much for, taking us through this. I know me and you, we can go on discussing about this for hours. This is something we sort of grapple with every day. But it was amazing to have this discussion. Shivam, if there are any questions, we are okay to take. Otherwise, me and Rupesh can talk for hours. I don't mind. I
Popular
have a
topic for
lot
both of
more to
us.
learn. Yes.
Yeah, so we are little out of time, so we can only take one more
Oh, is
question.
it? Okay.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
just 1 minute left, but yeah, we can take
Sorry,
one.
sorry, people. Me and Rupesh, we are both chatterboxes, especially on our favorite topic.
No problem. I have just given LinkedIn accounts of Mausmi and Rupesh. If you want to connect and ask questions personally, you can do that. Till then, I'm just going to ask one last question. It is, what are your thoughts on digital onboarding in the context of enterprise SaaS?
Okay. So I think a lot of companies are talking about it to make the onboarding low touch, more digital driven, and a lot of automations. And now we are living in this AI world. So now a lot of AI or driven automations are coming also along the way, which is a great development, I think. But I think it also comes with a lot of nuances, right? You have to take it in a more customer by customer, case by case, and see what makes sense for your business and also what makes sense for the customer. Sometimes customers are okay with low touch and whatnot, but sometimes just the large enterprise customers might expect you to have a high touch engagement, a kickoff meeting, and sometimes it's also cultural for certain regions. For example, we have seen in APAC region, it's different from US region. APAC customers or India customers will typically expect you to not a DIY mindset like a US customer. In APAC, it's like DIFM, do it for me, right? Even a small task that they want to close, they will expect you to come onto the tool and close it. So it's a very lot of nuances exist. So you have to see what makes sense for your business, what makes sense for your customer, and do what's right? So yeah.
For enterprise SaaS specifically, there's a sentence my sister told me a few days ago. So she said, I don't want AI to do my paintings and drawings. I want to do that. I want my AI to wash my dishes and, wash my clothes.
Yeah.
So, in that context, for enterprise SaaS, yes, I want AI to maybe help me get this visualization, help me get certain things. But the relationship that I have with customer, those are the things that I still want to do myself. So yes, digital
Absolutely.
is important, but digital in terms of creating certain visualizations, having that data in a structured way to be able to present it to the customer, particularly in enterprise SaaS space, having that digital touch point, probably being able to send some snapshot of it on a regular
Yeah.
basis, automated, awesome. All those digital for enterprise SaaS, awesome, should be there. However, the QBR meeting, yeah, you can also help me do some PPT and get some graphs and things like that, but I want to sit there with the customer next to me and talk to the customer and get that relationship going, because, well, No matter where we are, we do business with people,
Yeah,
especially
customer
when
doesn't
you
want
are
to be sitting
doing,
with you with a
yes.
robot for their QBR.
And
So
especially when you're doing large ticket size. For
yeah,
small ticket size, nobody cares, right? You go online, you buy Zoom, and it does the job. And you move on. It's a small ticket size. Zoom doesn't want to talk to me. I don't want to talk to Zoom. Neither of us want to waste time. However, if somebody is spending a considerable amount of money, they want to know a lot more, because it's not just our risk, it's their risk as well. They are putting so much money, and more importantly, they are adopting a tool within their entire business structure. And if that doesn't work properly, it's a huge risk for that business.
yeah,
So they also want to know who they are doing business with. Of course, you may have an amazing technology and everything else, and amazing, things work like this, but they still want to know who the individual company is behind this business. And there are lots of nuances to it, a lot of cultural nuances. Am I comfortable with that company? Is that company willing to go 2 steps ahead? And these, I think these things will always remain, even though we may have a lot of technology being adopted in various areas, but
yeah,
these things will, I believe, still remain personal. Like dating will always should always remain personal. That's what I think.
absolutely. No matter whether it is enterprise or SMB, it's a human buying from a human, right? So
Yes.
that's how it's been, and that's how I don't think that will change. So
Yeah, that's what AI tries, right? To imitate a human as much as possible. Maybe a better human sometimes. But a robot is always a robot. It's not a
yeah,
person.
Right.
exactly.
Um, okay, I think it's time to wrap up the discussion. Mausmi, Rupesh, would you like to say anything else before we wrap it up?
If you have any more questions, please ping me and Rupesh on LinkedIn. We are both very active on LinkedIn, and we love to talk about a topic like this. If you want to discuss something specific, feel free to ping at least me and Rupesh either. I'm sure he's open to that. Feel free to ping. We can get on a quick call. You don't have to buy our softwares. You can just talk to us. Yes, Rupesh.
Yeah, absolutely. It was an absolute pleasure. It was a fun conversation. Enjoyed talking. I think some interesting questions and points came up. So thank you so much for having me, Mausmi and Shivam. And for the audience, yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. If you want to discuss your own company specific challenges regarding onboarding, happy to share my thoughts and ideas to help you out. Yeah, so great to be here, and it was very fun.
Thanks, Rupesh. Thanks a lot. I love the framework and the level of, practical tips that you got into. I think this is something that people can actually take back and implement. And that's what we always try to bring in Scale Tail, that, let's not just give fluff and talk about like we should all do this and we should all do that, but rather give very tangible things within the webinar so people can actually go back and try to implement. And if you face any challenges, feel free to ping Rupesh or me, and we'll be more than happy to help. Thanks, Rupesh. Thanks a lot.
Awesome.
Okay,
Thanks,
so
everyone.
once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would really appreciate if you would complete that to provide your feedback. It really helps us to organize better webinars for you. Let me just paste the link of our YouTube channel in which I will upload the webinar recording by tomorrow. So in case you want to see the recording again, you can go back and watch it. Thank you everyone. Thank you for your time, and we'll be back with another webinar. Take care. Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye bye.
Have a good one. Bye bye.